an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire Shadow Book 1 of Shadow and Sea, chapters 7 and 8. In these chapters, we get to see what the training for gardeners is like, and we get to see Shera fail. Which, honestly, this was a good time to have that happen, because it starts to seem like Shera can't fail. And we need her to be a person. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is here in the chat. What's up? And George is going to be commissioning a couple of additional episodes to finish coverage because, unfortunately, he got the page count wrong the first time. And I just wanted to give you a heads up, George, that there is a slot open for November 5th. Starting at 7 p.m. if you are interested. So I know that you have been sort of wanting to get the jump on that. Okay, these chapters, there's a lot of information here that was very compelling. So let's start off at the beginning, 13 years ago. Reminder, we've been 15 years ago, so time has passed by this point. And the way that we see this training and the amount of money that is invested in it, we still haven't gotten full information as to not exactly how. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff we don't know, but that wall of mist and fog that Shera walks through the first time is not. It doesn't seem at the time as if that's an actual deterrent so much as camouflage of some kind, or at least meant to be intimidating enough to stop people who might otherwise be a little bit too inquisitive. But I'm wondering now, looking back, if Shera wasn't able to pass through it simply because of the fact that she was with Carrion. Obviously, it would be madness to try and invade this place when there are so many highly trained, dangerous people who are not only being trained still, but working there and instructing there. But I do wonder exactly what the measures are to keep this place secret and keep anyone out. You know, how much do they actually have to invest in security? Do they have it? Are there magical securities in place? I'm really curious about, like, the workings of this stuff, which isn't surprising because the logistics are always my thing. So, of the 2,000 consultants living on Grey Island, 512 were students. The Masons hosted the most, with 237 children of varying ages learning dozens of different professions. Next were shepherds, with their 123. The architects ruled the island. Their students kept separate from the other orders. 107 children studied to lead their guild. The miners, this one I didn't remember hearing about, a small and oft-forgotten order, housed only 42. These were the archivists, who kept and sorted the true wealth of the consultants, their records. So, like, data mining, basically. These are people who are moles, who go out there and find information and absolutely, like, keep a lock on everybody's doings, because, I mean, information is really the power, right? If the consultants knew it once, they would know it forever. The miners trained to keep it so. And then it says, because they also kept the personnel records for the Grey Island, they knew that among the 4 orders of the Amharane, only 509 students were accounted for. 3 had gone missing. Had this knowledge leaked to the wrong ears, it would lend credence to a nasty rumor, one that all consultants publicly denied. As everyone outside the island had been told again and again, the guild had no assassins. All this Shera learned as she and her 2 fellow students were taught how to kill people. So gardeners are not acknowledged. Everybody, it seems like a very open secret. It doesn't seem as if anybody actually doubts they exist. It's just that the consultants constantly deny it. And 3 out of 500 odd, that's a very elite group. And also, the fact that they can get by with so few, it speaks to the resilience of the gardeners, because usually when you have people who have to engage in any kind of like combat, which the point of gardeners, granted, is that they aren't supposed to engage in combat, right? That's what we learn in the last few chapters, is that Shera is told that's not the point. You're supposed to go undetected, is really how it's supposed to be. But they are engaged in extremely dangerous activity in which combat it's just an unavoidable, side effect. The fact that they can get by with so few is evidence of how confident they are in the abilities of those they train. They don't need backups. They don't need, it's not like soldiers where the more you have, the better. These are pinpoint precision weapons, these people. So that, for me, the fact that there are that few is somehow much more frightening in terms of their overall, importance. So much pressure must be on them. And also their efficacy. And we already knew Shera is incredibly dangerous, but there's a sort of justice to her. And by that I mean, while she doesn't seem at all upset by the prospect of violence, she also is learning this idea of having a conscience and assigning death where it's actually deserved instead of just doing the easiest thing. And that's not something that a person can simply that's important to me, the fact that she makes an effort to not just leave a fucking wake of bodies behind her. So, this just really surprised me, these numbers, I won't lie. The home of the gardeners was a vast underground chamber that Carrion said had existed since the dawn of the Empire. Over the years, all that empty space, enough to swallow the capital district where Shera had been born, had been filled with houses. Every conceivable type of shelter, from a simple lean-to to a sprawling Summerland estate, was represented here, recreated with impossible detail. That is bonkers to me. That's just, that kind of dedication. And this is sort of the thing that's always been fascinating to me, isn't even the jobs themselves for somebody who's an assassin. I'm fascinated by the training. And I've always been a little saddened, understandably, don't get me wrong, in spy movies and stuff, the missions are the thing that the movie focuses on because we're meant to feel the tension and the stakes, where you can't feel the stakes the same way when somebody's just training. It's, to me, a teacher's pet who is also an overachiever. Those stakes are still very real just in training. But I understand that cinematically they aren't considered as important. However, I have been, for example, those of you who saw the most recent Marvel movie, Black Widow, there's a portion of that in which we find out that all of the holiday photos that are in this alleged family album in their house are staged photos taken on the same day in quick succession and done to, on a set, essentially. And that, the Christmas tree had empty boxes that were wrapped underneath it. That shit, that's the stuff I find fascinating is the way that you create an illusion to begin with. That's the shit that I am interested in. And the actual going out into the world, by then, those people are professionals and I'm not as interested. I want to know, because there's a bit of a self-insert going on whenever you're watching or reading something like this, where you're like, I wonder how I would do in this sort of situation if I were given a full-time job of just becoming good at this. What would that experience be like, and could I do it? And obviously, no, I couldn't. I know already, but you still want to know, right? In her 2 years with the consultants, Shera had learned more about architecture than knife work. She still wondered who cleaned the hundreds of homes modeled here, or if they were somehow invested or alchemically treated to maintain themselves. The oldest houses in back, made of fluted columns and towering arches of stone, seemed remarkably well preserved. Though they had to be at least 800 years old, they were as fresh as if they'd been torn out of the streets yesterday. So I was a little bit gratified to find that Shera was also interested in the logistics and doesn't actually have all the answers despite that. So there's this girl named Meia, and Meia she's one of those people that's, it turns out that, what is her name? Alaya is her mother? Yala? Yala. It's Yala, right? And she has a lot of pressure on her. And the poor thing just doesn't have the innate talents that Shera and, as we find out, Luca have. And forgive me, guys, I am trying very hard to get these names right, but I will maybe get them wrong. George is here to set me straight. She had to climb a wall, kill a straw man, and return within 5 minutes. Shera could do it in her sleep. She had proved that once when she had fallen asleep in the garden and woken up at the top of a 6th century bell tower. Sleepwalking was a terrible curse. I'm sorry. What? I don't like that at all. In any way. That feels like a giant waving red flag, and I am concerned about it. I've already said I have deep concerns about the fact that Shera has to sleep so much. It feels like something is going on. It's put down as like laziness by various people, and it's so obviously not laziness to me. There's a difference. Laziness is trying to always find the easiest way out because you just can't be bothered. And don't get me wrong, there is a little bit of that in this scene especially, but the reason for that, I feel, is less because Shera doesn't give a fuck, and more because Shera is this is below her level. You know, this is like, when I was in kindergarten, I remember at one point, we were sitting in a circle and the teacher said, okay, we're going to recite the alphabet together. And as a kindergartner being like, ugh, again, we know the alphabet. Fuck's sake. I was so bored. And I have to imagine there were plenty of other kids in that group that were too. I'm not trying to say like I was so advanced. No, I'm sure that they were, but when something isn't a challenge, it's gonna bore you. That's not the same thing as being lazy. And the fact that she can't stay awake, it's not like she's choosing to sleep rather than it's an inadvertent thing. So it's not laziness, in my opinion. That doesn't fit the description for me. And also laziness usually is marked by wanting to let other people do a lot of the work for you. And that's sort of the opposite of how Shera rolls. She's a bit of a control freak, as we see, and would rather just kind of do stuff herself. So, again, doesn't fit the profile. And the fact that we have this like little detail dropped that she wakes up at the top of a bell tower that she climbed in her sleep. is that really what happened? Was she just asleep and sleepwalking? I don't buy it. That's too specific. I mean, I know that people can do wild shit when they sleepwalk. I've seen videos of it, and it's amazing. I truly can't believe people don't wind up dead more often, because it's just remarkable what people's brains, However, this feels like somebody's taking advantage of her. There's a sense of control to it that I can't help but be leery of. I always want to combine wary and leery, but then it's weary, and that does not mean, that's a different thing. So yeah, I felt like this was incredibly, it was dropped so casually, and I was just sat up straight and was like, what the fuck? Meia would have no trouble with it either. She was halfway up the tower before the echo of the starting whistle faded. She scuttled up the stone like a black spider, reaching the shuttered window in the top room inside 10 seconds. And Shera's watching this and thinking about how Meia takes everything too seriously. And this is the sort of thing that it's really easy to think when you are super good at something and you're watching somebody who doesn't have, for whatever reason, the innate ability that you have. It's just so easy to sit back and be like, you're just getting up in your own head. When you're not extra good at something and you're surrounded by people who are, that's tough to get over. As somebody who has a pretty big ego, I will admit, when I'm not good at something right away, I'm devastated by it, and that's even when I'm by myself. When I'm not good at something right away and everyone around me seems to be, I want to die. I will shrivel up and die. This has been a major obstacle for me in life, is just this feeling of I can't get my head right again once I'm shaken and my confidence is undermined. I'm a real Ron Weasley that way, where, he, in the, fifth book, he's gets made keeper and he can't do it. He's so bad at it. And the more he tries and the more people try and pep him up, the worse he does. That's me. I'm exactly like that. So I have so much sympathy for Meia, because it's just, some people are gifted with innate talent and some people either aren't, or their talents are in something else, but they are so focused on trying to do this one specific thing that they're not good at. And it can be really hard to think that, no, this is the thing I want and should be good at, when for whatever reason your abilities don't line up with that. Shera leaned back in the hammock. Ayana's tests were never this simple. She didn't want to test their athletic ability, but their judgment, which meant guards. Through a yawn, Shera started counting aloud. 3, 2, 1. As she finished her countdown, a door crashed open. Yellow lights flooded the room at the top of the tower, where Shera could make out Meia's silhouette and the sounds of combat. She let her eyes slip shut and drifted back into a state of relaxation. So, Meia fails. And the assertion is that she fought back, which is the problem. She was not prepared for them, and she didn't keep hidden, and it's just not how they're supposed to operate. And this is when we find out what the deal is with Ayana. Her parents were 2 members of the Imperial Guard who integrated parts from Chimera into their bodies. Such people were usually infertile, but when they did conceive, their offspring often had problems. Ayana's father had dropped her off at the Grey Island when she was 3 days old. Which, that sucks. I wonder if Ayana wonders who her parents are. I wonder if they ever got pregnant again and had kids, because, I don't know what birth control options there are on this island. And evidently, it makes sense now to hear that, this guy didn't know what to make of Ayana in their interview, because this isn't a completely unheard of thing to happen, but it seems like depending on what kind of chimera people absorb or integrate, their kids are going to be born with very specific different issues. So Ayana's whole deal is very unique to her and maybe isn't something that he has ever seen before. So Shera's takes her turn here. She gets up, and I love this moment. She should have borrowed some of that alchemical glue from Meia, or better yet, thought to bring some herself. When Ayana's whistle echoed through the garden, Shera hesitated. It seemed like so much work, climbing this tower with nothing more than physical effort. Maybe she could fail intentionally and share Meia's punishment. But as always, she saw Maxwell holding a smoking gun over Mari's corpse. Finish your work and rest, he'd say. Fail your work and rest forever. I really like this as a recurring, sort of theme for her. Because the thing is, a lot of authors would do, and it's not like this is inherently a bad thing, but I am having to admit I find this more effective. A lot of authors will choose to have somebody sort of motivated by a tragedy in their past that the reader doesn't actually get to see firsthand, either right away or ever. Sometimes it's right away. Sometimes halfway through or 3/4 of the way through the book will eventually be given the full story of whatever is driving them, some, awful experience and trauma. And it'll be told to us a lot of times, we will have put so many of the pieces together ourselves already at that point via context that finally telling us the whole story feels a little bit pointless by then. And it can be frustrating for me. But having the book start off with that formative moment and us actually getting to see the effect on her makes these moments where she thinks back to it much more engaging to me. I understand the stakes more intrinsically, and I just think this is a lot more successful than the other version of doing this that I've seen. And I love this. Once again, the world was simple. The faster she finished her assignment, the sooner she could relax. If I could just keep that fucking energy. Guys, I swear to God, I wish so much I could keep that shit in mind. That is a motto to live by. And yet I am like a professional procrastinator. And it's really something because I managed to convince myself that using planners and stuff is me getting shit done. And it's not. It's me learning how to procrastinate, but look like I'm doing something. I'm tricking myself and everyone. So anyway, she gets up there and she knows that there's going to be guards. And so she imagines the way that Meia did this and probably headed straight for the bed where the target dummy is situated. And she decides to do something a little different. So she closes the window, locks it as if nobody has come in, creeps up onto this wardrobe and hides there. And she waits until the guards come in and they poke around inside the wardrobe. They go under the bed. They look at the ceiling thinking maybe she's attached to the ceiling. And they just don't see anybody. So she's about to use one of the little spades. And let's see. The blade sank point first into the dummy's straw chin. Shera didn't know what signal the Masons were waiting for, but she expected that Ayana would alert them in seconds. Just in time, she curled back up. The two guards kicked open the door, leveling their model pistols at the window. When they saw no one, they hesitated. One of them laughed, and the other made an appreciative noise. They both moved to the window, throwing open the latch. Both leaned out, and Shera is like, "Oh, thank God. I had thought I could just climb down the wall for a second, but then I didn't do it, and I'm really glad, because they would have caught me. I would have been just, like, exposed outside. So, she jumps down from behind them, and she sneaks downstairs. But she doesn't realize that there's 2 additional guards. She made a guess that there were 2. But she was wrong. There are 4. So, here it is. Shera couldn't use real knives on these guards. A gardener, like, first they're consultants, but also gardeners are only expected to prune necessary branches. If she made a habit of killing unrelated people, they would never let her off the island. So, she I love this moment. She tosses something at this guy, and he smacks it out of the air, thinking that it's a weapon that he's deflecting. But instead, it's a pouch full of some powder that just fucking knocks him out, and he keels over. And the next one, she is able to wrap an elbow around his throat and manages to get him to the point of very nearly passing out, and he taps out, which basically is him agreeing to play dead or, unconscious, whatever the case. From the bottom of the tower was clear. Only a minute after leaving the bedroom at the top, she exited the ground floor. So she succeeds, and despite, being caught a little bit by surprise by the additional guards. So then we have, and I love this so much, how Ayana just doesn't want to, really... She's impressed, and it's clear, but she also doesn't like the fact that Shera seems so lackadaisical and, languid about the whole thing. And then we go to Lucan. Lucan, a man after my own heart. Lucan asks a lot of questions. He wants to know, what's this guy done? Why are we killing him? Why don't we feel like some other alternative, punishment for him would be better? Who exactly is the target? Who is the client that has hired us? What defenses does he have? All of this stuff, and Ayana expects him to just jump in and start. But the thing is that Lucan is explaining, as, it looks just like he's being he just seems like he's being a little defiant for the sake of it, maybe a little arrogant. But he makes a good point. I wasn't expecting to, completely be on his side by the end of his argument, but I sort of was. He's like, I could read various people involved in the situation and find out the answers to this, because I am a reader and that's what I do, before I started this mission. But because this is just a test, that's not actually the situation here. So I'm, unlike the others, not really getting a fair representation of the situation I would be in. There's a lot more to the job when I do it that we can't recreate. So you need to give me that information, because otherwise it's not going to be accurate at all. And I will have all of these other pieces of information and advantages which will influence how I do this otherwise. So she explains finally, and everybody seems really surprised by this, that Ayana fully explains in a way that makes them think that this is an actual mission, that I don't know if they think they're going to be sent on it, or if that this is a mission that has been done before, and she's relating to them the details of it when it was done the first time. But yeah, he's a smuggler. He basically imports drugs, and he has created a bunch of addicts, and some of the products have killed people. And all of this winds up being just a bit of a shock to everybody to hear. So then we have the start of Lucan's attempt at this, and he is so successful, and it's talk about sleepwalking through it. So he climbs this wall with these boots that are invested, but as this is described, that would require boots with some sort of significance. Maybe they had been worn by an ancient consultant with some great skill at climbing or crafted by a genius cobbler. Maybe the emperor had kept them in his closet for a while. I'm just keeping it in his closet? Why? What does that do? Then Lucan would need a personal connection to the boots. He might have worn them for weeks in preparation for a test like this. Then he would need the focus and strength to read the boots fully, to invest enough intent to bring out their full potential. Shera had seen him convulse from the aftermath of a reading before, and she didn't think he could handle making something like this. His training as a reader must have progressed faster than she'd thought. So he leans up on the window. It unlatches itself. He goes inside and then leaves again in under 2 seconds. And when he comes back down, he says that he invested the blankets on his bed so they clung to him and shut out all air. He would have suffocated in minutes. And everybody is just like, holy shit. Shera passed, but she did it using human means and just intelligence. Poor Meia didn't pass at all because she tried to fight. And he just strolled on in there and did this shit that's incredibly impressive. And Ayana just blows her whistle, but there's a sense of irritation to her here. So then we go to Carrion. And let's see. Ever since her promotion to the council, she'd met with the gardener mentor at least once a day. Those three would make up the entire next generation of gardeners, and it was important to the guild that they reach their full potential. And it turns out that they have already been requested by a client, and it turns out that it's the emperor. And the emperor is fascinating to me. Apparently, he's meant to be really old, and there's a sort of vibe to him that reminds me of Mistborn a little bit, where he's just seen as a god, practically. Ayana thinks to herself that there's no more ability to kill the emperor than to kill the moon. He's seen as simply a force, not really a person. And when she accidentally makes eye contact with him, she really kind of bugs out and is like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't get offended. So, oh, right. And we get an introduction of a couple characters here. A woman in full heavy armor covered in red and black plates. She looked like a Luminian knight wearing personalized colors, but this metal had never been dyed or painted. The consultants had learned the truth years ago. The armor was forged from alchemical alloys and awakened, capital A, by magisters that specialized in the working of steel. Legend said that this woman could take a cannonball to the gut without flinching a hair. Then again, if her reputation was anything to go by, she could probably do that without the armor. This was Geraldus Teach, general and head of the Imperial Guard, and she had risen to her current position on a tide of rebel blood. That is the most badass way to put that I have ever heard. I don't want to have risen to my position on a tide of podcaster blood, but I kind of wish that I could say that because holy shit. And she has this sword called Tire Fang, the executioner's blade that predated the Empire itself. If Teach wanted to kill everyone here on the dock, all she would have to do was draw her weapon. So, really getting some serious Yeren vibes here for those who are, cradle readers, the whole endless sword technique, it feels like, but it's not actually specified in any way how that would work. The Chimera's second passenger landed an instant later, drifting down to the dock as though he weighed nothing. His clothes were cut in an ancient style, voluminous folds of fabric that wrapped him in enough fabric to clothe a small village. Sunset colors, she noticed, layers of orange and red and gold. The only exception was a silver chain hanging round his neck that disappeared into the layers of his robes. His skin was dark, almost black, the sign of a pure-blooded Heartlander. He's the original Heartlander, she reminded herself, the father of every bloodline. He might have been born before the island on which they stood. And I was just like, what? You know, like, that's not just thousands of years. That is potentially tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Like, huh? I don't know. That's too much. That's too old. I'm just going to say it. That's too much time to be alive. You got to be tired by now, right? Like, God, I'm tired. I'm only 36. So he tells her to rise, and she says, I'm honored to serve however I can. And he says, I know you are. And he touches a scar on her face. You earned this in my service. This is not a mark of failure. It is a badge of loyalty. When you see yourself in the mirror, do not remember your mistakes, for I say you have made none. So this is just, I mean, she knows that he's a reader, and so probably he's able to actually tell from touching her what she's so, like, fearful of and worried about. But nevertheless, he just says the exact right thing to allay her fears and make her feel more confident. And I swear, I wish to God I had that kind of energy. I wish so much that I knew how to do that. That sounds amazing, to be able to, like, put people at ease and lift weight off their shoulders that way. So he heads off to meet our three people, and I want to know, I am assuming that this is going to be the first step to them coming into his service. As we know, they work for him later. But I don't know how, if that assignment wound up sort of developing over time and it wasn't how things began, or what. So then we go to chapter 8. Soulbound draw their power from a vessel, an awakened object, usually unobtrusive and small, that provides them with the abilities of an elder or chimera. If you must engage in a soulbound, God, I'm really messing up my reading today, guys. Sorry. If you must engage a soulbound in battle, first identify their vessel, destroy it if possible, and keep it from them if not. If you cannot identify their vessel, retreat. So, yeah, apparently soulbounds are badass. So, Jyrene, Tessela, Martin, and Shera are fighting. And Shera tries to tell her, I'm not even here for you. It's not even like that. Why don't you just go back to sleep? She says at one point. And Shera's a little bit thrown off by the fact that Jyrene is able to be like, are you a consultant? She didn't expect anybody to put that together. And the fact that she was able to tell, I don't really know what the significance of that could be, but she's clearly well informed, which is not something you want in your enemies. So, and she says at this point, Jyrene says, your time's up. Our family will lead this world forward into a new future. That which sleeps will soon wake. The words slammed into Shera's gut, making her hesitate. The mission she thought she understood splintered and reformed into a strange landscape. What was a member of the Sleepless cult doing here? Was she here to oversee the retrieval of the heart of Nakothi? Maybe to steal it before Nabirius could get it? That didn't make sense. Jyrene had been married to Calder Martin for 2 years, according to the file, and had traveled with him for long before that. What was going on? What's going on is that Yala is shady AF, and this whole mission is compromised because she's clearly up to some shit. I'm just saying, you weren't given all the information, and I can't help but wonder if that wasn't on purpose to put you in danger or God knows what. Something is up, and I don't like it. So at this point, they get interrupted by Calder Martin. And there is this, like, a series of things that happen really fast. She tosses her over, first of all, with a paralyzing agent. Jyrene would remain fully conscious as she drowned. Shera didn't care whether it was painful or peaceful so long as the woman died. She had fought the Sleepless before. They were a cult of elder worshippers, and Shera didn't have time to sort through the full implications of their involvement here on the ship. That was a topic to track down after she escaped. So, as this is all happening, she thinks to herself, how am I going to complete this mission? And I'm like, you just said after you escaped. I thought that meant you were going to abort the mission, but evidently not. She decides that she's going to still try and actually accomplish her goal here. And I'm just like, oh, girl, you've already lost. Like, you have to see that you've already lost. But no. So she faces Calder. He stood shirtless in front of her, his bright red hair practically glowing, a pistol in his left hand and a sheathed blade on his hip. He tossed his pistol aside and pulled his cutlass, flicking the blade at Shera with more speed than she'd anticipated. The file suggested his skill as a swordsman was, quote, moderate, but she thought that information may have been out of date. So, at this point, shit starts to get real, and she realizes that in her efforts to not kill people, she's kind of compromised herself. Like, if she were going into this with a more brutal point of view, then she might have been in the cold place that she needs to be already, but she wasn't, so she has to try to get there. So she buries a needle in his arm and manages to get him to collapse. And a dark-skinned man, for some reason dressed in a full white suit and broad white hat, leveled a pistol inches from her nose. And I was like, where the fuck did you come from? She ducked, swept a kick at the man's knees, moved forward as his shot went wide. A roar shattered the night, and Shera knew the truth without looking. Orzaya Woodsman had recovered, and she's just like, oh, god damn it. At this point, she does realize that she just needs to get the fuck out of here. She thought she could do this before he recovered from the needles, but it's too late now. Nabir Claiborne stepped out onto the deck. He stood next to the mast, a blanket around his shoulders, and a cocky smile on his handsome face. Lucan's freedom stood there, daring her to attack. So she did. And as she's coming at him, he looks above her and smiles and says, too late. And she manages to slide to a halt just before Tristania, the woman who's covered in bandages, falls from probably the rigging, above her head. And she has a whip. And the whip is her soul-bound vessel. Soul-bound to the awakened tail of a storm wing, extremely dangerous. Approach only with great caution. Where the point of the whip struck, a white explosion blasted the air like a lightning strike. That sounds rad. I want to see this, please, on screen. Thank you. I like the idea of a white flash. That's one of those things that maybe as the wielder of a weapon you can get used to, but it will really throw your enemies off badly. And as we see, there are some repercussions to this thing that are really unthought. It's unexpected. So, she closed her left hand around the grip of her second shear. She hated drawing it. The weapon seemed to laugh at her. So, the woman flicked her whip. Crackling with light, the end flashed towards Shera's head. If it made contact with her skin, the force of this soul-bound vessel would blast her entire head to pieces. Shera struck the whip with her left hand blade. In the distance, she thought she heard a shrill, cruel laugh. Both of her shears were invested with years of intent from generations of gardeners, but the weapon at her left was special. Lucan said it bore heavier intent than any other weapon on the Grey Island, which, damn. When a blade of such powerful intent met a soul-bound vessel in battle, the two powers clashed. In this case, the flash of light from the Stormwing's tail flared like a newborn star. Heat sheared Shera's entire left side as though she'd stuck her arm in a pot of boiling water, and she was the only one on deck to squeeze her eyes shut in time. Everyone else shouted out, blinded, as Shera dashed for the side. The light left spots on her vision, though her eyes had been closed, so she could only see well enough to toss herself over the railing. She struck the water only feet from the Mason and his wave rider. So Jyrene is on the back of the Chimera too, and she's just like, wait, you pulled her out? And he asks, well, should I put her back in? And she decides, no, fine, we'll keep her. And they escape from there, but I am wondering if that, like, because as we see later, she's burned. You know, the explosion that results from the clashing of these two weapons causes burns all over her, including like even on her lips and stuff. And I'm wondering if that's maybe part of the reason why that woman is always covered in bandages. Maybe that happens frequently enough, or the flashes from using the whip have injured her, or it's not, maybe the bandages aren't due to an injury sustained. Maybe they're invested to protect her from injury. I don't know. But in any case, I'm interested in what the significance of those bandages is. The Council of Architects had seemed perplexed upon being confronted with Jyrene. They couldn't understand why Shera hadn't killed the woman, but they were unwilling to order her execution themselves. They didn't want to lose a potential source of information about the Sleepless Cult and their cabal of leaders. I found that pretty funny, the idea that, like, they don't react with, like, oh, sweet, we need info. They're just like, oh, I guess, like, yeah, I mean, no, we can do something with her. It's just, we weren't expecting this. It's like somebody comes to your house and they have like 24 marinated whole chickens. And you're like, look, I could cook this chicken. I'm not going to like say no to free food, but this is some work that I hadn't planned on. I don't know where to put this. What am I supposed to even do? You know, it's just like, kind of inconvenient, even though in the end it's pretty generous. You know, this is one of those things where you're just like, what? So I found that really funny, and I thought that it was a good way to sort of get the reader to understand that they don't deal with like captured prisoners often. This isn't the way they tend to operate. So I find that to be pretty significant. All right, so Yala is here to, I don't want to say crow over Shera's failure, because I feel like that's a little bit too mean-spirited. It's more, Yala is the one that is crowing over it the most. Yala is like, well, I didn't think it'd work, but I'm glad that you're at least still alive. And I love this. Heal quickly. And then she had the nerve to leave a basket of fruit on the nearby table, which I did think was really funny. A week later, Shera was stripped naked in her infirmary bed as a cluster of alchemically trained architects busying themselves over her blistered skin. Her lips had healed, but there were a shocking number of more severe burns all over her body, especially the left side. And as this is all happening, Meia comes in, and she sort of tells her, you trying to fight a soulbound. You're lucky that you're alive. This is really your fault. And you should have had me around. And confesses, I haven't, like, when I was younger, I didn't even think you could be injured. And I never saw you injured this bad. So it must have been pretty fucking serious. So at this point she says, I came from the prison. And oh yeah, here it is. His guard is free with the gossip. He knows that you were injured. Obviously we're talking about Lucan here. Anything else? You're asking me if he knows you did this for him? No, he hasn't figured it out. Did your mother tell you? I knew the second they told me I could find you in the infirmary. When you fight with a clear head, you don't get injured. So that was a kind of a neat observation, that the fact that she had a dog in the fight here that was more than just, I need to succeed and stay alive. In her opinion, that fucked with Shera's judgment. And I think that's a good thing to know about her. You know, it's part of her needing to choose to go into the coldness in order to be clear-headed. And she just wasn't doing it. As she says at one point, she looks at Niberius and sees Lucan's freedom. That's not the place to be in your head when you're trying to do something like this. That influenced her too much. So she's right. Meia's right. I rode in from the Fiorian reaches. Some of the tribes up there just found out that the emperor was dead and started causing trouble. Independence, rebellion, elder worship, you know how it is. I'd finished pruning some of the low-hanging branches when I received my mother's message. As soon as I arrived, I headed straight to Lucan and then to you. I haven't had much of a chance to settle in yet. So, I love this. The fact that Shera tells her thank you, and Meia is like, you're starting to act like a person? I don't know about this. You're kind of losing your touch here. Might hurt yourself, so be careful on that. I liked it. I've begun preparations for the next mission. We leave in 5 days. My mother tells me you might be in fighting condition, and I do want you along, but if you haven't recovered, leave it to me. And Shera tries to be casual about it, but Meia's like, no, seriously. If you can't handle it, you need to stay. And as she's leaving, she says to an alchemist, you have 5 days to get me back in, or Shera says, you have 5 days to get me back into fighting shape. Meia caught the end of Shera's threat. I want to hear you say, yes, gardener. As she left the infirmary room, Meia caught the end of Shera's threat. How nostalgic, she thought. It had been more than 10 years since she'd last heard Shera threaten a medical alchemist with death. The muscles in Meia's hand rippled beneath her skin, stretching and pulling at her joints. Her fingers forced themselves painfully apart, her fingernails hardening into claws. An inhuman rage filled her heart, and from the prickling in her eyes, she knew her pupils had changed shape. Tiny movements in the corner of her eye made her jerk her head. The swish of a passing shepherd's hand brushing against the wall made her snap to the side, looking for prey. With a moment's concentration, Meia pushed the sensations back down. The anger subsided, her vision returned to normal, her claws retracted, and her arm settled back to its human shape again. This happened 4 or 5 times a day since the Emperor had ordered her enhancements. Yikes. So basically, what it is that she just doesn't have the talent that the others have, and she can't keep up. But she has some. She's been put through training. She has dedication, commitment. That's not nothing. So they basically tell her that she can leave the Emperor's service, or she can undergo some alterations. And it's not even a question. Of course she's going to undergo the alterations. And this is just so, upsetting. We have solutions that will give you the power of a hydra, the constitution of a nightworm, the fortitude of a deep strider, all the natural advantages that the Chimera have over man, they will be yours. You will be like a champion, but unbound by their rules. They were so excited by their opportunity to serve the Emperor with their art, the alchemists had pulled out all the stops. She was poked, prodded, submerged, injected, day and night, forced to swallow potions, pills, and solutions with every meal. And the pain. Even 12 years later, Meia shuddered at the memory of the pain. She'd gone to bed every night shaking and crying, praying that this day's treatment would be her last. Worse, her body was out of her control. Before long, her room was covered in bloody scratches from the times she tried to claw her way through the wood and stone. Yikes. This is a nightmare. Like, I already have a real sensitivity to any storylines that involve medical experimentation. It just freaks me out. If my mother were here, she would say that me having a particular trigger means something happened to me in like a past life, which maybe, who fucking knows? But sincerely, medical experimentation is one of those things that's like, I find it really repulsive how we as human beings are able to overlook the pain and torment people went through just because the outcome wound up being helpful, like to the direction of medicine. I don't know that it's worth it, especially because a lot of those people didn't choose to be part of it. They were just chosen because they were black, because they were women, because they were slaves, because they were Puerto Rican. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. So this gets to me really bad. And Yala, being such a factor for Meia, choosing to do this, feeling like she couldn't let her mother down, it adds this twisted aspect to it to me that's really saddening. And it makes me like Yala even less than I did. I already didn't trust her. But that, to me, is evidence that she seems like a bad person. If her daughter doesn't agree to continue these horrific tortures, then Yala won't ever see her the same way again. That's fucked up. So eventually, she was strapped to a table and she was screaming. And Shera busts into the room to protect her. And Meia notices the difference in Shera's whole attitude, because she normally has this sort of impassive expression and gets shit done, but there doesn't seem to be any emotion behind it. But when Meia sees Shera's eyes at this point, she is full of rage and tries to get her out of there, tries to tell them to stop. And finally, Shera backs off, and she tells the alchemists, you heard her, keep going. As long as she survives this process in one piece, so will you. That was the first time Meia had ever thought of Shera as a friend. Seeing Shera in the same position now, helpless in an infirmary bed and surrounded by medical alchemists, made her feel oddly protective. Part of her hoped that Shera would do the wise thing and stay home, but they were hunting Nakothi's heart, or I think I said Nakothi's heart. I can't remember how I pronounce it. The name brought up years of traumatic memories for Meia, and it had to be much worse for Shera. Meia's friend would do whatever it took to get rid of the dead mother's heart for good. And yikes, what does that mean? It's bad for me, but it must be even worse for her. What the fuck happened? 5 days later, when Meia woke up, she found Shera standing over her, dressed in all black. You should be more alert, team leader, Shera said, taking a bite of an apple. Meia sighed and rolled out of bed. So yeah, she was right. Meia may not have the physical talents that Shera and Luca have. Or Lucan? Luca? God. I feel like I've been saying his name right this whole time, and then I just lost it somehow. But she definitely understands the psychology of these people that she's surrounded with, which is very valuable. I'm not sure that Shera necessarily has that same talent. We all have our thing. So I'm going to wrap But yeah, this was very full of information. Really, I feel so bad for Meia. I really just sympathize with her a lot and understand why she would let herself be put through what she was. I wouldn't, but I get it. I really get it. And I'm extremely interested to see what happens now that Shera failed the first mission. Like, now what do we do? So, yeah. Thank you again, George, for commissioning this. I appreciate you. I hope that you guys are all enjoying the coverage. And I will be seeing you again on Friday with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.